So if you're joining us today, it's because you're passionate about MRO, and you may recognize the technology you're currently relying on isn't doing it as far as your MRO optimization strategy is concerned. All of us managing either MRO procurement or maintenance use like ERP or EAM, which are certainly needed in the enterprise. We're not here to dispute that. We're not here to tell you to rip or replace these critical systems. But we know firsthand, either from speaking to prospects or speaking with our customers, that these systems are missing the mark when it comes to optimization, whether that be due to like a data dependency, or they simply just weren't built for optimizing MRO and spare part inventory. But the good thing is that we believe that there is a different approach to MRO optimization, and that's what we're here to talk to you about today. So before I introduce my panelists, let's go through the agenda so everybody kind of knows how we're going to flow through today. So we're going to start off by talking about the challenges that existing tech stacks aren't addressing as far as MRO processes, procurement, operations are concerned. We're going to talk about how companies can enhance those current systems, with AI and purpose-built solutions in order to get rid of some of those data dependencies we were talking about. We are going to talk about why organizations do not need to hang on to this data cleanse mentality that we've seen for so long. We're going to talk about why you should constantly be evaluating and improving your MRO maturity, regardless of where you're at on that journey. And then we're going to talk about the importance of bridging the incentives gap that we often see between procurement teams and operations teams. So let's meet our panelists. Our first panelist is Lily Gordon. Lily is a senior manager and head of Verison's onboarding team. And Lily was just recently named the 2024 Supply Chain Pro to Know by Supply and Demand Chain Executive. Welcome, Lily.
Thanks, Josh.
And our second panelist is Michael Mink. Michael is a senior account executive here at Verison and has over 20 years of experience helping enterprises optimize their MRO strategy. So, again, just going straight into the agenda, let's talk about, and Lily, we'll start with you on this one. Let's talk about some of the challenges that we're seeing that maybe aren't being addressed by existing tech stacks that we often see prospects and customers rely on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the first thing I'm seeing is data fragmentation. In these asset-intensive organizations, the data is often pretty dirty, incomplete, and inconsistent, and amongst the hundreds of thousands of MRO parts that you're housing. These parts come from a wide supplier base, so it's difficult to unify and streamline a system for these type of parts. And not only is it difficult to keep a system of this data, but then be able to optimize on top of that. And then along those lines, the data is very siloed. I see a lot with my customers. In these traditional ERP and EAM systems, there's this inability to see what they already have versus what they need. And there's also a lack of intuitiveness in order to drive where that MRO optimization and review needs to occur. It's a challenge when companies also go through mergers and acquisitions, as well as ERP upgrades or implementation to other ERP systems. And then an example of this is I have a large pulp and paper customer who, when they started an onboarding with Verison, had 2 SAP instances. And even though they were on SAP, the 2 instances looked very different from each other, were customized and configured in different ways. That company didn't necessarily invest in streamlining from one system to the other. And I feel like a lot of customers are in similar situations where they feel like this data segregation can be a blocker right off the bat, to even begin to optimize their MRO data, and have visibility into these 2 or multiple data sets across plants and systems.
Absolutely. So, Mink, let's kind of lean into some of the stuff that Lily was talking about there. So when you have multiple data sets, or you have like an M&A where you have, kind of like nuanced, data coming in from 2 different orgs, how does that impact like operations teams that are on the plant floor, as well as contribute to some of the stuff that we see, like rising costs, unacceptable downtime levels, the negative impacts to the bottom line we see?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I think Lily, kind of nailed it there with the unstructured data. I mean, we know it all comes down to trying to find this balance of cost and risk. And I can give you a couple examples that are kind of real and things that, I'm seeing today working with some clients. I mean, a very common and kind of simple example of business impact, that's kind of resulting from some of these typical challenges that Lily's talking about with unstructured data and kind of this untrustworthy MRO data is kind of that always frustrating and kind of dreaded duplicate materials. We all know that somewhere in our data, there's duplication or duplicative parts, right? And so duplicative parts within your ERP and your EAM really frustrates everyone across the business, from maintenance to schedulers, planners, procurement. I mean, it kind of touches everyone, but what we don't often discuss, Josh, is like, what's that overall business impact? How do you quantify that? And what are duplicate parts really doing to the business and the bottom line, right? And so an example I can kind of give you is we recently worked with a Fortune 200 oil and gas producer, global company, a large organization with dozens of locations across the globe. And they kind of recognized that their MRO operations were a bit out of whack, right? And we ran their data through our platform, and we kind of quickly are able to identify 8,700 SKUs across those regions that were duplicative. And so that's an enormous amount of MRO parts and data that are really all kind of, mirror images of each other, but are called different things, have different part numbers and different attributes, but essentially they're the same things cobbled together in kind of just disparate descriptions, right? And for them, 8,700 parts may not seem like a lot. Maybe they had 500,000, or maybe they even had 1,000,000 SKUs. Well, you would say that's not a big number. But what we really found was that was $37 million of on-hand inventory globally that's not being strategically sourced, that they're not leveraging their purchasing power and their volumes. That's thousands of parts that are taking up costly and valuable warehouse space. There's things that are just on and on and on that are business impact there. I mean, you can talk about carrying costs, for example. Think about $37 million. How much of that's duplicative, and how much is that inflating their carrying costs? How much of that are they paying taxes on? And overall, just like, what's that unnecessary spend that's like really draining their profitability and efficiency to the business? So I think that's a really simple example that I think everyone can kind of connect to as they think about their data, and recognizing that there's probably duplication in there that's costing them quite a bit of money.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it's not just the $37 million with the on hand, it's that carrying cost, which, we know is like an extra 15 to 20%, on top of just the actual value. So, I mean, it's just an astronomical amount of waste, and you guys gotta look for it and be able to find it. And, these are not challenges that are unique to this one particular client. We see this across the board with all the companies.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can give you another example where, and again, being on the front lines and kind of working with a lot of clients, I see this often, and it wreaks just havoc on some of their strategies and their initiatives. Another one is, you see a lot of kind of static and outdated stocking policies and lead time data, right? Same kind of challenge, but just showing up in a different way for the business inside of their ERPs and their EAM. And it's just unnecessary risk, and unfortunately avoidable downtime, excuse me. And so when you think about tech stacks, it's like most ERP and EAM systems, they just don't have the automated work streams for kind of regularly, analyzing and updating, these min-max stocking policies, or kind of relying on accurate lead times. So most of our clients, they're kind of living and breathing on this kind of static historical data and the rules that were set at some point in time, but it's not fluid, and it's certainly oftentimes not current. So we hear a lot about, stocking policy, kind of dated stocking policies. People are going off of, prior lead times. And then we see teams that, because they recognize, that the tech stacks that they're using, maybe their current ERP is not as dynamic. We know that, they're kind of building their own BI tools, they're creating their own dashboards, and unfortunately, a lot of them are, building their own spreadsheets and then sending those spreadsheets around kind of outside their ERP and kind of outside of what you would hope for in terms of structured processes. And people just can't keep up with that. The supply chains are dynamic, as we all know. Demand is dynamic, and we just see a lot of these kind of external tools that teams are building. They're just not able to kind of hold up, and unfortunately, they're creating a lot of additional work, and then sometimes they're just being ignored by a lot of by a lot of teams that ultimately they're all trying to get to the same problem, right, and to the same solution. So the business impact on this thing, if you back to your question about kind of the business impact of some of these challenges, right? Aside from one of the other kind of most important kind of elements of MRO optimization, which is material criticality classifications. I mean, there's probably not another more important impact area than optimizing your stocking policies. And so when those stocking policies get out of whack, we see clients, that are kind of consistently struggling with service levels that, are not optimal. They have increased inventory expedites. They do a lot of expediting because, again, those stocking policies aren't tuned and they're not optimized. You get a lot of folks that are coming to us saying, hey, we believe we have a lot of inventory bloat. We think we have hundreds of millions of dollars in excess inventory. And we all know what that does to the bottom line and to profitability. And then on the operations and maintenance side, Josh, we see a lot of the impact in terms of planned work or unplanned work. Everything kind of gets moved around and rescheduled or delayed. And people are double handling material because the material that they thought they were supposed to have based on their policies and based on their service levels is not actually there. So you get a lot of this double work and a lot of this inefficiency in the planned and unplanned work in terms of how maintenance teams are having to kind of grapple with some of these challenges. So I think another good example there of what we talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Lily, makes a lot of really good points there. And so again, we don't want to discredit the need for ERP and EAM systems. We know they're critical systems. We're never going to say that you shouldn't rely upon them, but they should be a component. But what is it about them, that we know from like a data standpoint, and kind of making so going into some of the things that Michael just mentioned, how they're kind of just not addressing MRO needs.
Yeah, that's such a good point because ERP and EAM systems, they play a crucial role in housing and managing your MRO data. They're great at scheduling maintenance needs and work orders. But what I see is that they're built primarily for direct materials, and it can be tough to fit MRO materials in that same box as the direct. They have different needs, different data to look at. These systems were just not built in a way to address the root causes of the MRO challenges, which can tend to be a big blocker in a company's road to optimization around these parts. The data in these systems, they typically operate in silos is what I've seen. And I've sat down with my customers who are on SAP and Maximo, and I've asked them, hey, take me through all the screens of data you would need to feel confident enough to begin decisioning on your materials. And, whether it's changing those stocking policies or looking at the lead times. In SAP, it's close to 18 screens of data you would need to pull together for one part. And then Maximo, I've seen anywhere from 10 to 15. That's a ton of screens to pull together in your systems. To then feel comfortable, like you're in a place that you have all the data you need to then start decisioning and acting on it. We want to get to a place where MRO strategy and optimization is quick, it's efficient. You shouldn't need 10 to 15 minutes just to gather the information of data you need around your MRO before you can even begin to start on the analysis for optimization. So overall, I think that ERP systems have inadequate functionality for MRO optimization and predictive maintenance, especially. Customers just continue to struggle with optimizing their stocking levels and tracking parts across multiple facilities specifically too, because of those silos I talked about within ERP systems.
Yeah, absolutely. So like Michael, to Lily's point, jumping from all those screens, not efficient use of time, not a great way to try and find materials, definitely not a great way to source materials. So kind of lead into the, let's talk about how those shortcomings just create these inefficiencies that we've kind of been talking about already, but just continue to hinder these efforts of, trying to make MRO like a functional strategy within your organization.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, Josh. And by the way, you can call me Mink. It's totally fine. I think Lily, honestly, Lily nailed it again. I mean, she
Yeah,
said something that I know resonates in every conversation that I have, which is time. And so true MRO optimization, really it simply just comes down to people, process, time, and technology. And I think to me, it's a straightforward recipe. And in today's business and economic climate, I mean, people and time are becoming such a scarcity and a scarce resource. I think we all know that, and I think we can face it that most folks kind of feel like their MRO operations are a bit understaffed. I think if you talk to people that are in the warehouses, Josh, you're
yeah,
obviously in a warehouse today.
yeah.
You could maybe, yeah, you could agree with this, but I think they're all feeling overwhelmed, and typically it puts material management teams in kind of this constant reactive mode. And when you're in constant reactive mode, you're kind of in this fight or flight mentality all the time. And I think these types of teams are constantly fighting fires and just reacting to as the day comes. And it's hard to, no, it's not hard to kind of see, how right sizing or trying to be a lean MRO operation can be. It's a bit of a unicorn, right? You've got limited resources, limited people, limited time. We're all here today to talk about limited tech, but yet, I think the business and certain, functions within the business may be asking for this unicorn in terms of being this most optimal optimization, group. So to me, those are kind of some of the key things that we all know are there, and we have to find a way to take advantage of technology and automation where we can. And so as I touched on, I mean, most of the clients that I talk to are they're trying to do their best to keep up with these optimal levels, and but they're kind of missing the true system of routine, right? And so I think we'll talk about here today, the difference between or why there's a need for a system of routine versus a system of record. And I think Lily's describing it perfectly, what ERP and EAM systems are built to do, which is be a system of record. But again, I mentioned earlier, they just lack the workflows. And so most of the teams that I work with and that I talk with, they're falling behind, and they're just simply not able to maintain the discipline and kind of that consistency over any frequency of time to keep themselves in balance and kind of keep themselves right sized.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's interesting you mentioned those like system of routines because there are other areas of the business. You mentioned the warehousing aspect, you see a WMS or a WES, those are systems of routine that typically go back and talk to an ERP. And it's what we're here to talk about today is kind of like how you can use that for an MRO optimization strategy, optimizing your MRO. So with that, let's kind of lead this into our, segue into our next, segment, which is, again, we're not saying rip or replace, but what can you use to enhance these systems? And so that's what we want to talk about because, we don't need to go out and completely reevaluate or, tear down your tech stack. So how is it that AI and, solutions that are purpose built for MRO are helping customers like we work with every day and the prospects we talk to complement and expand their MRO optimization strategy. So
Yeah.
Michael, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I was going to jump in and just say, I mean, I think what you're hitting on is exactly who we are and what we're trying to do, which is create and develop and deliver purpose-built tools that complement existing tech stacks. And I think everyone on this session today can probably think about or understand kind of where purpose-built solutions fit, and purpose-built solutions have always been around and are kind of necessary tools in not only business but in our everyday life. And so to kind of give you a little comparison, think about tools in our everyday lives or technology in our everyday life that we need that are complementary, that are purpose-built, and they're kind of doing a nice job, riding shotgun, if you will, or being a co-pilot to a lot of these major things that we all use. And a couple examples for me are Teams or Zoom or chat, or a lot of folks use Slack or WhatsApp. These are all applications that are purpose-built and complementary to some of the tools that we all use today. They're not trying to replace our iPhone. Slack is certainly not trying to replace Outlook. But Outlook is not built to do the things that something like a Teams chat or a Slack are built to do, in terms of the interface, the efficiency, the purpose, and so on. And so I think those are just some examples, but purpose-built tools, they fill the gaps and they complement these mainstay tools that we live in every day. And when you're a materials management group, or you're a supply chain group and you're managing hundreds of millions of dollars in spare parts and inventory, to me, it shouldn't be any different. I mean, I think it's just time for these teams to have these these kind of innovative complementary tool sets that are riding shotgun next to your ERP, but have really supercharged and superpowered capabilities like we're doing with generative AI.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so from there, like, can you just give us a couple of examples of, like, specific what we've been seeing, people actually, because we talk about what it can do, but how, like, give us some use cases.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think a few that are really top of mind for me is, one of the examples that we see a lot is, kind of the overall just kind of spare parts criticality assessment, and trying to figure out how to help reliability and maintenance teams, assign criticality and service levels to their common parts and their critical parts and their spare parts, and kind of do it in a way that is, methodical in terms of, a traditional ABCD analysis, right? And so I know a lot of teams, I talk to them every day, that are kind of working on this now, kind of tailing the pandemic and the supply chain crisis. This is an area that hit people really, really hard, as they didn't necessarily have the robustness in their criticality and in their service levels in terms of their spare parts. And so we see a lot of reliability and maintenance teams kind of focusing on this and kind of figuring out how do we accurately classify and kind of formalize our spare parts criticality and service level criteria. What makes a part in a criticality to the business and needs a 98% or a 99% service level, right? And so it's spare parts that are mission critical, Josh, they need to be classified as such. We all know that, but how do you get that done? And so teams are obviously trying to focus on ensuring kind of peak asset uptime, and they're working on minimizing their planned and unplanned downtimes. They need to have accurate bill of materials. Those bill of materials obviously need to associate correctly to an asset. And then within those bill of materials, we all know how important it is to have kind of that criticality and the insurance that you're really looking for to kind of mitigate risk there. And so, having something it's like a motor or a bearing that you've classified as a criticality C part with a service level of 65%, when in fact it's an A criticality item that needs to be on the shelf no matter what. I mean, having that kind of mismatch in your data, or having that type of outdated data, can be disastrous, for a planned, or even unfortunately for an unplanned occurrence. So, if you think about what generative AI can do, for reliability and maintenance teams, they kind of, they just have this kind of wicked new arrow in their quiver, if you will, to really try and achieve this peak performance, because they kind of have another co-pilot now helping them try and try and identify this. So, we worked with another energy company along this thread, who they didn't have spare part criticality assignments or service levels in their inventory. And Josh, you might remember this one. They kind of just had in their ERP that particular items that were critical just had an X in some obscure kind of data field somewhere buried in their ERP material master. So if it was X, it's critical, and if it's not X, then it's just not. But we don't really know how to kind of maintain a service level on it. So in that one, they had, I think it was nearly something like 500,000 parts in their ERP across the globe. And they were trying to figure out, how do we assign the right appropriate criticality here? How do we make sure we have the right service levels in the system? And then, of course, like, how do we help our material management teams, manage those items based on the criticality and the service levels that we've defined? And so without them, it's kind of chaotic. But to kind of wrap up the example, I mean, they went back and they said, okay, well, if we're going to do this at 500,000 SKUs across the globe, we think it's probably going to take us over 1,000 hours just to simply review the material, build some tools to try and figure it out, then decide and agree and capture what that criticality assignment's going to be. And then ultimately get to, some level of confidence where they could get it back into their ERP. And so what Verison was able to do with our AI platform, of course, and our data science, and kind of looking at the models and kind of factoring in some data benchmarks, along with some of the assumptions that we built with the customer around their business, we could basically ingest all of those spare parts with the history of the bombs and so on, and the movements and all the procurement data, and take those 5,000 parts and get them into the system and get them into Verison, identify a criticality of A, B, C, D, or E, and a service level, that's appropriate to those criticalities, and do that in a matter of minutes instead of 1,000 hours. And who knows how long that 1,000 hours is going to stretch over 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, right? So we're able to use AI and use data science to get to that in a matter of minutes for them. And now they're kind of off and running to the races of making sure that the inventory levels are right, making sure that their supply chain is intact to kind of meet those levels. And so I think that's a really good example of how purpose-built tools with modern tech can kind of take something from 1,000, down to minutes, right?
No, absolutely. And you make good points around the criticality too, because even if you're not doing a criticality review or don't have the initiative to do that criticality review, you might get caught up in one of these, instances where someone's like, we got to cut 20%. We don't have time to analyze all this. And then they do a blanket 20% cut across their materials. And then all of a sudden, some of these things that should have been high criticality didn't have the X in it. They're gone.
Yeah.
And some of the things that had the extra criticality are still sitting on the shelf, and those are fast moving. We can get those anywhere. So it's
it can be disastrous. And I mean, the other thing that was I think a great outcome of this exercise with this client is, they didn't just get kind of this one-time criticality, assignment, or this one. We're not treating it as a project. This is an ongoing, constantly iterative, kind of a system where, as new assets come in, as they phase out old assets and they're getting, additional parts, and they know that they have critical items for new assets, Verison's going to be there again the whole time, kind of riding shotgun and making sure that criticality is appropriate, service levels are appropriate, and people that are responsible for stocking it are going to be able to keep up with that, as opposed to 3 years from now doing another criticality assessment to realize that they're kind of out of balance, right?
exactly. So, Lily, Michael's making a lot of really good points here. And he's, leaning into the better decision making around these things and resource optimization. So kind of, from your viewpoint, how is this really just being changed by AI?
Yeah, I think efficiency is really key here. AI allows you to comb through millions of records of data. And like Nick was touching on there at the end, this is not just a one-time review, and it's also not a data cleanse. It can perform this process on a weekly cadence, once your data transfer feed is set up, to ensure you're getting real-time results with the most up-to-date data. So I think that's the really cool thing about AI, is that it's able to constantly refresh the data and, rerun these recommendations based on trends and purchasing. And, if it's quick moving materials, it'll gather that data. And I've just seen a ton of time and cost savings here. And what I like about AI is that it performs that initial round of recommendation review for you. And it's by no means making decisions for you. It's instead ingesting and taking all those data points available at the plant material level. And then it'll surface those materials that are essentially at risk and you should be looking at sooner rather than later. And that's the part where it can put that predictive maintenance into your MRO optimization processes. Oftentimes a customer, they don't get the chance to review a material till it's too late. It stocks out, and then everyone's frantic and you're looking for parts to fill that. So leverage the AI to surface these materials to you sooner rather than later, to help review those materials that maybe haven't been turned in over a year. It just really helps to surface what's critical in driving your MRO optimization, especially when you feel overwhelmed by all your materials and you don't know where to hop in. So I see a lot of our customers get value out of that. And then along those lines, AI has really been or provided crucial time savings for our customers. So like I mentioned previously, with the reducing the amount of screens of data you need to gather and being surfaced the materials that you should be reviewing, it really allows your employees to spend less time reviewing and gathering the data and more time on other responsibilities to their role. And one example here is I have a customer that they told us they've been able to save to date 6,000 man hours because they went from close to 300 procurement managers who were sourcing and reviewing the materials to centralizing to 7 employees in an innovative excellence center. And, you know, this didn't put everyone else out of a job. It more so allowed them to reallocate responsibilities, freed up their times to then put their time towards more critical tasks of their job role and responsibilities. So they're not tied up in these mundane task reviews of combing through all your materials.
No, and that's a really good point, right? Because, we've talked about it, for the past several years, is, that, from our viewpoint, AI is not replacing jobs, right? It's augmenting people's jobs. And so you're freeing up now time of, 300 people to now redistribute that time to other areas of the business, take advantage of those skill sets that they have. And so, and just to create more efficiency, which you mentioned, is key here, right? So, but Lily made a really good point, Michael, that, about the data cleanse, right? And like, how we're not relying upon a data cleanse in order to do these things. But, there's a lot of companies that still like are kind of programmed to adopt that mentality. They think their data is not in a good enough place to get started, or they're scared they don't have enough of the data. So, let's kind of lean into why, we believe there's a real shift away and how we're helping, customers away from that mentality.
Yeah, yeah, I love this topic because I get to talk about it a lot, and I'm certainly passionate about it. I've lived it, I've breathed it. I came from a Verisyn customer before joining the team here, and so these are things that we dealt with, right? But it's exciting because, Josh, like right now today, we're proving that that generative AI and machine learning and the things that neural networks can do, and technologies like natural language processing, all these things are kind of breaking that kind of traditional linear approach to inventory optimization. And that linear approach is kind of like the old way of thinking that, in order to right size my inventory, in order to get to the business outcomes that I know will happen when I'm optimal, I can't possibly, Josh, of course I'm speaking from the tone of someone who's thinking in the old way. It's like, I can't possibly assess my real, slob inventory now. My data is too dirty, or I can't conduct a strategic sourcing initiative because all of my material categories are out of balance, or I couldn't possibly figure out how to do network hub and spoke inventory with such dirty data. But we know that that's not true today, and it's an exciting time, and it's a great place to kind of be on this cusp of where we're proving that new tools and modern tech can really overcome some of these data obstacles and get clients to the business outcomes and get them to the efficiency that they're looking for way differently than they've ever thought about it before, and kind of getting them away from this linear approach and getting them into this more flywheel or this more cyclical approach of you can do both of those things simultaneously. You can kind of get after the impact and get after the savings, if you will, while simultaneously building more robust processes and enriching your data. You can do that today. And so I kind of compare it to, this is maybe a little cheesy analogy, but I kind of compare it to how people used to think about weight loss, or how they used to think about getting to their optimal weight, right? It's pretty clear today that like the best way to get to your ideal weight as a human is to kind of have this balanced combination approach to like transforming your diet, and at the same time having an exercise routine. You kind of need both. If you're too heavy in one or too heavy in the other, you're probably not going to get to where you want to go. So decades ago, it was like, well, if you just keep a 2,000 calorie diet, Josh, and you just stick to that, don't worry about exercise. And we just know that today, that's not true. And I think the same thing applies to data cleansing and data enrichment. So we're able to now prove that you can have messy data, unstructured data, while at the same time focusing on the business outcomes that we've talked about today, and some of the impact that we've talked about today. So to me, it's like this interesting conversation of not trying to do any kind of mind changing, but really just opening people's eyes to the fact that I don't necessarily have to wait 12 or 18 months, go through a data cleanse, pay $2 a record to clean, my a million SKUs, to then try and figure out how to get to optimized levels, how to get to some of the outcomes. I can do those things together. I can work with companies like Verison. Verison has, partners, and I can, leverage some of their partner network to kind of do the enrichment, do the cleanse, get to the outcomes and the savings, and kind of do it all together. So it's exciting time, and I think we're proving that that you don't need to look at it that way any longer.
No, I completely agree. But Lily, you see the data, like you touch the data, you're there when it comes on board, you're onboarding it, but you're also looking at, beforehand, before anything, occurs, just to make sure that people can use this data. So, kind of lean into that and, talk, to highlight some of the things that Michael was talking about how, you don't have to embrace the data cleansing.
Yeah, I feel like the mind shift for MRO strategy is now MRO should be in a format and in a centralized place where you're able to easily review it. It should be important to be able to surface all the information around those materials that you need to start any type of optimization or strategy change with MRO. And something kind of simple around this is that I have customers who come into our platform regularly simply for the ease of searching for materials and seeing all the relevant information presented in one view. By allowing machine learning to come into play with your dirty data, you might, have some people who call a motor MOTOR, and then another user has typed in the material as MTR. Let machine learning help you with that and save you time so you don't have to go searching around for all those materials. I think this just being able to simply search around MRO materials has been such a game changer for a lot of my customers in terms of their MRO strategy. Being able to regularly review your materials with ease and then go drive the change in optimization has really transformed the way they think about MRO. And just to go along with this, I have one customer who's leaning into this concept of having a freestanding Verison kiosk on the plant floor to allow users to come by, search for material, quickly pull up the information, and then, go on their way with finding what they need. And I think that's a big win for prioritizing MRO strategy and giving your operations and procurement the tools they need to go ahead and enhance and optimize. It starts with being able to search on your material, see its information in one place, and then leverage AI to bring to the forefront the materials that should be reviewed. And also I have a large customer in the energy space who they give users access for search in our platform, no questions asked, because they've accepted that ERP and EAM and the traditional nature of those systems isn't necessarily the best place to search for the needs with your MRO materials. So it's nice that MRO strategy is being prioritized there as well. And I think it's important to allow the narrative around MRO to continue to evolve. You may have once been overwhelmed with the thought of needing multiple data cleanses before you could even dive into any kind of strategy around your materials. And I mean, how often have you thought, no, my data's in a bad place, I wouldn't even know where to start? Instead, I've just found my customers being able to shift the mindset to embracing the data that you have. And then from there, you can control, improve, maintain, and standardize your MRO data. And then in the end, you'll have a better handle on your MRO strategy and improvements to align with your business goals.
Right, and I think both of you kind of like, point out, what's kind of inferred here is that, we've seen time and time again that, this mentality has probably held more organizations back because they never really get around to optimizing their MRO, right? Because they're still waiting for budget to be allocated to a data cleanse for MRO, or MRO never really hits the priority for it and stuff like that. And now, when we're telling you that you can use the data that you have to get started, that you don't have to, get in line for, at your org and, with the consultants and all the other stuff to see if my data is going to be the one that gets cleaned this time. So I think, moving away from this data cleanse mentality is really now opening the opportunity for people to find just real value very, very quickly.
Yeah, I totally agree. And along that is shifting the mindset from this doesn't need to be an implementation. This does not
Yeah.
have to be a year-long process. It's more an onboarding to get you into a place where you can get started right away. You don't have to worry about cleansing your data like we talked about. But you also don't need to worry about AI taking away your decision rights. I want to call that out too, because you should be able to embrace this change where AI is doing all the groundwork for you, so that when you then get in front of the material, you're fully equipped to get in there and act on it. You're still fully in control. I think that's really important to highlight because that can be a common misconception around AI.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's been a lot of people that are kind of concerned that like, they'll let the system loose and you'll start making all these decisions without input.
Yeah.
And concerned that, it's like, was it really gonna optimize? And it's like, no, you still have decisioning rights. You're still in the system using it, teaching it, really is what you're doing more so than anything.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, good
I mean, all of those, I think, are just really good points, but I think it's now time we can kind of shift into like why. And we've touched on this a little bit earlier on, because as you mentioned, Michael, with an always-on system and stuff like that, but the need to constantly evaluate kind of like your MRO maturity, where am I lacking? Where am I strong? What can I do to improve my MRO maturity? Why this is kind of a constant thing and not a project.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's I think the age-old story of continuous improvement that we all know, is a big part of asset-intensive organizations, regardless of what area of the business you're on. Your finance, your materials, your reliability, continuous improvement is what everyone needs to continue to focus on, and that's no different than MRO. And I think if you really want to think about practical tips or strategies that organizations can look at and kind of assess where they are and how do they get better, I think it all starts with just this is probably any good strategy or plan starts with this, but it's a real honest assessment of what your current situation is, what your gaps are, where do you see opportunities, where you want to prioritize them, and what are all the factors that are kind of coming into how you got to where you are, and how you want to get to where you want to go. And Josh, for me, it's like, as a sugar and a candy addict, I'm going to put some humor into this. As an addict, you got to admit that you have a problem, right? The first stage of getting, or overcoming addiction is you got to admit you got a problem. I have a candy problem, and I need to get over that, right? And so I need to assess what are the things that are causing me to always want to reach out and go grab candy and sugar and all these things. And that's funny, but I mean, I think that's what teams need to do. And so what does that require, right? It requires kind of bringing together, people that are in your inner circle. For me, it's like, is my family feeding me candy all the time? Is it their fault? And what's going on? No, obviously the answer to that is no. But for a lot of our customers, it's like bringing together their cross-functional teams, and unfortunately they have misaligned incentives. But even if those incentives are misaligned from supply chain to ops to procurement, you got to come together. And you got to have honest conversations about where you're struggling together as kind of a unified group, and then you got to figure out how do you work together in harmony. And what I know is working today, and I'm seeing it every day, is taking a data-driven data science approach to kind of bringing together and harmonizing yourselves for optimization, right? And so today with Verison, one of the things that we do, and that I think is obviously incredibly impactful, is taking that data science approach and using it, and providing a pre-sales service to our clients. And we provide an opportunity assessment as a pre-sale service to help organizations do this. It helps them truly assess their maturity, where their data is at, how dirty is the data? Is it really something that you can work with? And we do this kind of a service by ingesting a few years worth of their data, running it through our models, and then helping illuminate like where's the opportunity, help them predict if there's a business case here. And so for us, there is kind of this consultative approach to how we engage with a client and helping them figure out how to assess themselves, but doing it with their data. And so I think that's probably a great place to start. And if I was to give a tip to anyone, I would say just kind of take that approach, be honest, bring people together, do that hard work, that hard self reflection, and do it with data. And I think you'll figure out very quickly where you can go kind of work on.
Yeah, absolutely. So Billy, what are you seeing in terms, from like an onboarding standpoint, when customers come on, where people are on their maturity scales, and and what you think about, how people can approach, evaluating the maturity and then enhancing the maturity essentially once they're on board.
Yeah. Honestly, I see customers come in at a wide variety of MRO maturity scales, and that's great. We'll figure it out together on what their approach is going to be. But there's some customers who they know they need material categorization and criticality around their MRO. They're intimidated and don't even know where to begin to set that up. We can work with those customers. But then we also have customers who might be further along, they've tried those processes, they've set it up for maybe a couple plants, but have difficulty making that internal change and rolling it out to the broader organization and creating sticky processes that get adopted. We can help with that too. So I think that's kind of fun to see a wide breadth of customers coming in and seeing value. And something that's really helpful here is that they're using an always on solution now, which helps customers from falling into that trap of looking at their MRO as a project-based approach rather than which they might have done in the past with those data cleanses and, criticality one-time workshops. So, we're trying to make this, drive that internal management change around your MRO strategy. So you really see the optimization for the long term. And Michael touched on this too, that we understand that there are different personas involved in the MRO process around strategy. There's maintenance, there's procurement, there's operations, who all need and should be involved in the decision-making process around MRO optimization. So I think getting users into workflow here for decision-making is very crucial for helping to create that internal change management. A baseline workflow is needed to scale that MRO optimization realm and allow you to review your materials faster and with confidence that the right people have reviewed it, you've had the right eyes on it, and you're ready to go ahead and roll out those changes. And then along these lines with the strategy, customers have taken the approach of figuring out how they would scale so they don't implement this too fast, so that you don't get adoption. So I've worked with customers. We have a large beverage company we work with who opted to onboard their customers in zones. So start with North America, figure out what works, what doesn't, and then go ahead and roll out to South America. And that way you have a control on how you're rolling it out. You get more plants and facilities needed over time. And then you start to have a visibility across those different plants and facilities that you might not have had with your traditional siloed ERP systems previously.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think, oh, sorry, Michael, you're gonna say something?
No, just real quickly, I think Lily touched on it great. I mean, she touched on collaboration and how important it is, in the strategy to focus on collaboration. And, again, any good tech product, that's going to try and bring data science to a decision is going to make sure that they have collaboration within the platform and collaboration across different stakeholders. And I think that's fundamental. It can't be a one-way decision. It can't be procurement and supply chain deciding that inventory levels are going to be a certain way without the input or the data that reliability, operations, and maintenance, brings to the table and, needs to align on. So collaboration is big.
Yeah, so that's perfect. This lead us into our final segment today. It's like, because we know that when we've hit on it throughout the silos, the misaligned incentives, it's one of the overarching challenges as far as MRO optimization is concerned. And so that's kind of what we work to do. We provide all these benefits around cost savings and criticality and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, we really want to just kind of bridge these gaps and kind of show that these incentives are really kind of on within the same vein. So let's talk about how orgs can use AI, and let's kind of approach it from a procurement side and ops side. And so Mike, I'm going to lean into this. So from a procurement standpoint, how do you see like the benefits and how of AI and how it can help them get closer to ops? And from the operations side, how can it help operations get closer to procurement?
Yeah, I think from the procurement side, I mean, we talked a lot today about, data and kind of the overall goal of data normalization. And I think that's where procurement is really, focused. Is they want, good, normalized data that's true. They want this, material truth, in the system, and they want to be able to. I've never seen a procurement team that doesn't want to partner with operations or doesn't want to partner with reliability and maintenance. They want to partner, and they want to be able to sit down at the table, and they want to be able to look at material truth. They want to look at the data and know that it's real, know that it's true, know that it's accurate, and then come together as kind of two teams that are fighting for the same thing and make good decisions about what's right for the business. And so I know, in talking with procurement teams, they obviously they're focused on cost, they're focused on price. That's their incentive, and sure. But I also know that, getting to good data and normalized data that they can share across each other and come to decisions together is ultimately the goal. And so when you think about data normalization and getting those duplicates out of the system and getting the right stocking policies and the right criticality levels, I mean, all of that's just going to drive, first and foremost, to really good strategic sourcing decisions. If you have the right material segmentation done, you have, the right criticality set, you've got the right suppliers, you've got the right service levels, you've got, you've got everything kind of buttoned up, you're going to drive incredibly, efficient strategic sourcing decisions. You're certainly going to curb things like purchase price variance, where we see a lot of our procurement teams who are fighting, what they pay for, an item in one area of the country versus what they pay in the other. So that PPV is obviously going to be something you can focus on. We know tail spend is a big challenge with MRO. Most of our clients have hundreds, if not thousands, of MRO suppliers, right? And that's because oftentimes, there's issues there in the data, and they're not able to really see through it. So we know that there's a really big opportunity for procurement teams that can focus on tail spend. And I think there's other, use cases, that we discussed earlier, that all ultimately, Josh, are bottom line margin driving, things that show up on the balance sheet, right? So you think about things like, free cash flow. If I don't have to buy the inventory that I don't need now, and I can defer, buying that inventory for when it's absolutely available, then I've now freed up cash flow for the business. I can take my procurement teams and I can go invest in other things now today that normally I'd have working capital or I'd have cash tied up in inventory. And so procurement teams, I know, are kind of seeing those benefits. You're also, seeing things when you think about stocking policies. We talked about stocking policies earlier. Well, if I right size my stocking policies, I now have all of this overmax inventory, right? I have this inventory that I need to burn down. I don't need to go buy anymore, right? And I have plants maybe all over the Southeast or all over the country that are using that inventory. I should just transfer some of that excess to them as opposed to having them, purchase it. So there's a lot of procurement strategies that ultimately start kind of unfolding here that, again, kind of show that partnership with operations and maintenance that, hey, we're not just taking away your inventory. We're not trying to, downsize your inventory. We're trying to be efficient with it. And when we're efficient with it, these are the P&L impacts that we can all, kind of, drive together that make the business more efficient and more profitable.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you hit on the normalization aspect, and particularly, so how does, operations teams, how are they going to benefit from that, that normalization? What kind of trust can they lean into as far as that normalization is concerned?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's confidence, right? And maintenance, reliability, and production or operations teams, depending on what business you're in, you're oftentimes, in a lot of cases, you're the customer, right? Procurement is trying to work on your behalf to keep the plant running or keep the machines and the assets up or to deliver, so oftentimes they're the internal customer that a lot of other cross-functional teams are kind of working to better service. And so when you're the customer, right, and your job is to you're responsible for the output, if you will, better data, improved visibility, improved inventory positions, less risk, better service levels. I mean, these are all things that ultimately mean higher production, higher outputs, increased asset uptime, and all of that, again, that this is now the operations side who are doing all of those things, to work on, improving capacity or increasing capacity. And again, at the end of the day, they're working on improving the bottom line. They're working on improving the margins by focusing on what they can do from an operations perspective, but they're the customer. And so they need inventory. They need the right parts at the right time, the right place, the right quantity. Everything's about having the right things. And so I look at operations and procurement in those two ways. And again, I think they're both focused on the same thing. And they need to kind of work together and service each other, and they need to have purpose-built tools that they can both collaborate within. And I think that's what AI and certainly what Verison's trying to do here.
Yeah, absolutely. So Lily, Michael makes a really good point, how both those cross-functional teams, can benefit. But, what does that do for the, the larger organizational strategy? How does that benefit the overall organization or enterprise?
Yeah, it gives operations and people in the storerooms the opportunity to exercise their experience, their expertise, and their asset knowledge directly, influence the procurement process. So, a lot of knowledge gets lost in just people's brains and experience and doesn't get utilized across the board. So I think that's huge with leveraging AI, that you can take all this experience as feedback for the models, and it gets listened to and taken into account. And one example I have is a pulp and paper customer that I have. They've seen the value with our models. They know that they have that sense of trust after being able to give their feedback to the models and go through reviews with it, that they're in a good spot to let the models work and give them the right answer. And they've set up batch acceptance with us, which continues to create efficiency for them and free up time for where they can optimize and do strategy in other places. And I think this also shows that none of this is an overnight change. No one's expecting that. But if you take that sustainable and scalable approach, you can get to a place like this where you've created that internal change management and processes are working, and you trust that your strategy is in a good place. The mind shift in MRO strategy really needs to pivot towards this internal change management for long-term optimization, just to continue to drive that time and cost savings. You really will see it in the long run if you're setting your processes up in place, with bringing your data together in one place and leveraging AI to get that long-term success.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's, just a lot to digest here. We covered like a wealth of knowledge today, right? We've covered just a lot of great topics. And, as we wrap up, I think it's important that, we just continue to highlight these, this need for, injecting functional MRO, and strategic MRO into the business, recognizing that MRO is not just a cost center, right? It's a value driver, right? So we had a couple questions that came in. Unfortunately, we're at time, so I'll make sure that I follow up with those individuals. I'll make sure that you get your questions asked. But as we leave you here today, we do have like a couple of things that we would like you to check out. So Verison.com, we have a plethora of resources that you can check out, see how we're helping. We got case studies, we've got white papers, and we've got actually a tool that's on there that shows, just you fill out 4 quick fields. It shows you what we think, baseline opportunity could be. So we invite you to Verison.com to check that out, fill that out, you get your response right then and there. But if you would like to have a more in-depth conversation with us, we'd love to hop on a call with you, talk to you for a bit. So you can simply go to the website, click schedule a call, request a demo, and we'll definitely get something set up. But we appreciate everybody for joining us today, and we'll talk soon. Thanks all.